If you killed what you thought was a ghost, would it be murder? Or what if you were just scared out of your wits and shot in self-defense at what seemed to be a ghost? If the ghost turned out to be an innocent man, would that be manslaughter? This is what jurors had to decide in a bizarre case that took place in Hammersmith, London in 1804. A man was killed, and another man was sentenced to death, and a further man made a stunning confession. It all happened one wintry night in 1804. In the early 1800s, London streets were very dark and misty at night, and lawless. The biggest city in Europe was chaotic and bustling. London was yet to form its own police department, and innocent civilians were sometimes the victims of late-night attacks and robberies. Most people walked to their place of work and lived near their families and shops. In early January 1804, however, many of the people living in and around Hammersmith were terrified to go out at night for any reason whatsoever. But why? Because a ghost had been spotted and was allegedly terrorizing the area. It's important to remember that in the early 19th century, people still very much believed in supernatural forces, weird phenomena, and wild ghost stories. So when rumors started flying around about a white, hooded, ghost-like apparition, Hammersmith residents were in a state of near hysteria. The ghost had first been spotted in November of the previous year. Witnesses reported seeing something tall and draped in a white cloak-type garment. Others also claimed that the mysterious entity had horns and large glass eyes. The ghoul was menacing people throughout November and December on an almost nightly basis. Many of the encounters occurred near the Hammersmith churchyard. Some locals were quick to pounce on the significance. Only a year ago, a man had slashed his own throat and committed suicide. He was buried in the Hammersmith churchyard, and this was surely a sign that his spirit wasn't fit to be sent to the afterlife. Others were convinced it was some form of poltergeist that had long been possessing the area. Whatever the origins of the ghost were, there was definitely something strange going on. A woman driving a horse and cart almost crashed when the white figure suddenly jumped out at him. Then a pregnant woman and an elderly woman claimed that they were being followed by a ghost while they walked home near the churchyard. The tall white figure had snuck up on them and grabbed them. The women were so shaken by the encounter that they never recovered and died a few days later. This is no doubt playing on the mind of Thomas Groom, a young brewery worker. Groom was walking home through the churchyard one evening with a colleague when he sensed he was being followed. As he stopped to check behind him, something suddenly jumped up from behind a gravestone, put its hand around his throat, and squeezed. Groom cried out and struggled with his attacker, which released its grip and ran off. During the struggle, Groom had lashed out and felt something like a great coat. Groom recalled that some person came from behind a tombstone and caught me fast by the throat with both hands and held me fast. Naturally, news of the attack spread across London, and by early January, the residents of Hammersmith were forming nightly patrols. Many people were reasonably sure that it wasn't a ghost, as such due to Groom's recollection of it wearing a cloak. This backed up what other witnesses had seen in December when the ghost-like figure was seen shedding its clothes as it ran into the darkness. William Girdler was a night watchman who had seen the ghost on the evening of December 29th. When he shouted and gave chase, the so-called ghost took off its shroud and threw it away as to escape. Nevertheless, whatever or whoever it was menacing the good folk of Hammersmith, and tensions were ever so high. Many men and women had heard of the white-cloaked figure's antics and had decided that it wasn't a supernatural force they were dealing with. Determined, they formed mini-patrols and hit the streets, many of them armed with guns. One such man was 29-year-old Francis Smith. Smith was a mild-mannered and well-liked customs officer. On the night of January 3rd, 1804, Smith was patrolling the neighborhood near the churchyard with another night watchman. He was no doubt anxious about running into the ghostly menace and had steeled himself with a few nerve-settling ales before hitting the streets. Smith was armed with a shotgun and briefly met William Girdler, who had bumped into the ghost only a week earlier. The two men chatted momentarily and agreed to call out if they saw anything untoward. They continued their patrols anxiously, and Girdler was eager to make amends for the previous encounter when the ghost slipped away. It was about 10 o'clock at night by now. At the same time, 32-year-old bricklayer Thomas Millwood was visiting his parents and sister at their Hammersmith home. Millwood was still fully dressed in his work clothes. He was wearing white trousers, a white apron, and a white waistcoat, head to toe in white. His relatives were understandably apprehensive that this appearance could alarm people, given the panic concerning ghost sightings. In fact, only a few nights earlier, a man and two women in a horse and coach had mistaken him for a ghoul, with the man shouting out, "Are you a ghost?" Millwood wasn't worried, though. If anything, he was amused. At 11 o'clock, he said goodnight to his family and left the house on Black Lion Lane. At exactly the same time, Francis Smith entered Black Lion Lane, gripping a shotgun tensely. It was a dark, dimly lit street with the moonlight blocked out by tall thickets of hedgerows. Smith saw something draped in white walking towards him. Terrified, he shouts out, "Who comes there?" There was no answer. The white figure continued ambling towards him. Smith had his finger on the trigger. "Who are you? What are you?" Again, no reply. Smith cried, "I'll shoot you!" And so he did. Thomas Millwood stopped, collapsed, and lay dead on the London street. People heard the shots and came running. They found Smith standing over Millwood in a state of shock. Millwood's body was taken to a nearby inn where a coroner confirmed death by shooting. Smith confessed to the shooting and was taken to Newgate Prison to await trial. Just 2 days later, a local bootmaker, John Graham, went to the police with a stunning confession of his own. He admitted that he had been dressing up as a ghost and scaring the daylights out of the Hammersmith residents. When asked why he'd done it, Graham explained that he wanted to scare his apprentices. Apparently, they'd been spooking his children with ghost stories, and he wanted to get his own back. Incredibly, the magistrates listened to his story, and they let him go. They had no legal precedents to hold him, and they weren't sure what to do. In the other case, Smith's trial took place 1 week later. It was a sensational story, and news of the case had spread across the nation. Smith pled not guilty to murder, claiming he was only trying to protect himself. He admitted that he knew Millwood was not a ghost, but was still scared for his safety, so he fired. The judge, Lord Chief Baronet, ordered the jury to either find Smith guilty of murder or clear him altogether. The jury found him guilty, and Smith was sentenced to death. As he was dragged screaming in protest from the court, the public outcry began. Lord Chief Baron was only too aware of the national interest in the case and support for the accused. He referred to the case to the Crown, where the decision was overturned. Smith was sentenced to 1 year of hard labor, and in July he was given a full pardon. But this bewildering case didn't end there. Over the next 180 years, the Smith example was referred to whenever someone was in a similar predicament. In 1984, it became a law not to charge someone with the crime if they misread a situation and used force with good intentions to protect themselves or a third party. As for the prankster cobbler John Graham, who dressed up and caused all the trouble, no action was ever taken, and he was never heard from again.